Right.
I'd like to explain that a little bit about what Karin said. This is definitely the issue, is the term marriage. The marriage, as in Prop 8 says, marriage means a man and a woman. Domestic partnership is man and a man, a woman and a woman. Mm-hmm. And that's why it's a separate definition. It's like a black person is when he fights for civil rights, or Asian Americans fighting for equal rights. I am not asking the white community to call me white. Mm-hmm. I'm not taking away the term of Asian American. I prefer to be called Chinese American, Chinese, whatever my ethnic background is. Mm-hmm. I'm not asking them to change the definition for me to say, call me white. You got to call me white, right, so that I get the same rights. No, it's a definition difference. Definition, marriage is man and woman, and domestic partner is man, woman, woman. So that the rights, as even Karin has affirmed, it's a separate alternative because of the separate definition, not because there's any difference in what they receive. There's, hospital visitation rights, all that kind of thing included in the domestic partnership. It's a definition that I think the word marriage needs to maintain its separateness and an understanding so that there's clarity, and that the gay community or gay marriage proponents want the state to recognize that and sanctify that as marriage. But I believe that word term marriage should be maintained as a man and woman, domestic partnership as something else.
Mm-hmm. So you're claiming that the definition for marriage is between men and women, but if same-sex married couples, the name for it should be domestic partnership.
Right.
All right. Well, we have only a few minutes left for this segment. Let me quickly go into another issue. I know there are a lot of issues. Try to cover them if I can. It's only an hour show. There's a talk about that if Prop 8 doesn't get passed, there's a lot of religious groups, as we know, a lot of religious groups are for the Proposition 8, that they may lose their tax status, that they will get sued if they don't cater to the same-sex couples. So either one of you want to take on that one?
Well, I'm happy to address that because I would say when I've talked about this issue, and as I said, I've worked on it for 3 years as a civil rights lawyer, so I get asked that question a lot about religion. I get to ask the question about education quite a bit. I think it is a good question. I think it actually relates to what Katy said about how people view the term marriage. And I think what's most important to think about is that I think this is a confusing issue for a lot of people. It's also a very complicated issue. And I think what people are confusing is what is basically two words that sound the same but mean really different things. And by that I mean the word rights. So I would say what's important to understand is gay marriage or same-sex marriage, and those of us who support it, is actually about legal rights, R-I-G-H-T-S. It's about what rights, as you said, Katy, what rights the government gives. And the government actually has a mandate, at least in our country, a democratic country, to protect rights, R-I-G-H-T-S, like people's ability to do certain things. It prohibits us from doing other things. It prohibits discrimination. It allows us to express ourselves, First Amendment, freedom of expression, freedom of religion, etc. So those are what I would call legal rights that are given by a constitution that are enforced by lawmakers and judges and people like the governor. What people are confusing that with sometimes is the other definition, or the other way, that other word that sounds similar, which is R-I-T-E-S, rights. And that's like a right, like R-I-T-E-S would be, well, what do I do when I go to church and I get married? Like, what are the traditions around that? What are the customs? What are the things that I do as a family, as a celebration? So it's really a distinction between what does the government do in terms of providing sort of legal protection versus what are churches, and not just churches, not everyone gets married in a church, but what do different communities do? Churches do one thing, Chinese people do a whole, another set of traditions and practices. And really, the bottom line is this: if Prop 8 passes, it eliminates the right to marry. What it is it taking away a legal right. It really doesn't have. If it fails, as you said, and gay marriage is allowed to continue, and it's been going on for about 3-4 months now, it really doesn't have any impact on what churches choose to do. And one of the questions I get asked a lot is, well, won't churches lose their nonprofit status? Won't they be accused of being discriminatory because they won't perform a gay marriage? And I would have to say people should take out the word gay and just think about what can churches do now and what do they not have to do, and that's not going to change. So right now, no church has to marry anyone they don't want to marry. So that's why I have friends who have to convert to Catholicism, for example, to marry their boyfriend or girlfriend who is Catholic. Or I think the Mormon Church is the same way. Many Christian churches have rules about who they will marry, who they will not marry, and that's not going to change. The Supreme Court, in its decision, actually said, and I'm going to read this because I don't have it memorized: no religion will be required to change its religious policies or practices with regard to same-sex couples, and no religious officiant will be required to solemnize a marriage in contravention, basically against his or her religious beliefs. And that was actually part of the Supreme Court decision. They spent a lot of time distinguishing what I just said between legal rights and what people do as traditions and practices.
Okay, and let me stop you there so we can go into a commercial break, and then when we come back, we can hear Katy talk about this. Thank you. Welcome back to Community Roundtable. This is going to be our last segment. I know this is a very heated and very controversial topic here. Last segment we left off is I want to give Katy a chance to respond to issue regarding to the religious group losing their tax status.
Mm-hmm. Well, Henry, the thing is this: it has already happened. In New Jersey, a Methodist church campground lost part of its tax exemption because they refused to allow a lesbian couple to use their campground to perform their civil union ceremonies. And the lesbian couple sued them, and it was determined that they would lose part of their tax exemption. So, it's just, if a state affirms gay marriage, in order to be consistent with itself, it cannot also support tax exemption for religious organizations. That's just what would naturally follow. For example, if a pastor refuses to marry a same-sex couple, but the same-sex couple is supposed to have the basic human rights, how can the state support the basic human rights and allow for tax exemption of an institution? It would contradict itself. So eventually something is going to give. There will be an effect on the tax exemption status of churches. But I'm not so much, not only concerned about the tax exemption, but I am even more concerned about the freedom of religion, for people to be able to practice their religion the way that their conscience dictates. For example, in San Diego, doctors were sued by a lesbian for refusing to artificially inseminate her based on the doctor's religious conscience. Now, they were sued, and they're taking that to court. So things like this we're beginning to see that a person cannot even file exemption. And you've heard of the case in Massachusetts where the Catholic Charity had to close its doors because they did not want to place children in lesbian or same-sex couples' homes, and they were getting sued. Now, they don't have the money and all that to go through the whole lawsuit, and they could apply for an exemption, but they were told by the state legislature that if you are going to apply for exemption, you're probably going to be denied. And instead of having dragged that to court and all that, they had to close its doors. And, it's not, it's based on freedom of speech, freedom of religion. Which is more important, that or gay rights? These are First Amendment rights that is going to be impeded upon. And that's my fear. And that is a very, very realistic issue because we already see it happening.